Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here and or for watching this recording on behalf of ASHE, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. My name is Alicia Castillo-Shrestha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Director for Conference and Events for ASHE, and I'm joining the session today from the contemporary and traditional homelands of the Shawnee and Miami in what is now Southwest Ohio. And I'm excited to welcome an amazing group today to share their expertise and their thoughts and ideas around how we can infuse creativity into our submissions to the call for proposals for the 50th annual conference. And excited to be recording this session as well for folks to reference at their leisure as we prepare for the call for proposal due date coming up on April 30th. So I will help monitor the chat. If you have specific questions or you need technical help, any support around accessibility, you can direct message me, and I will be also answering messages as needed that are shared in the chat. It's our pleasure to have our 2025 conference chair join us as well to kind of facilitate the discussion today. So I am really excited to help pass this over to Shauna to introduce our panel and share some ideas around what we're hoping to get out of this session.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you to everyone showing interest in this work. We're really appreciative and excited about the proposals we'll see. I just want to say first, thank you also to Alicia for organizing this. We're really hopeful that it helps with people's understandings for what's possible with relation to proposals. So we'll get started by quick introductions, and then we'll just delve into some thoughts around what is possible. And then we'll open it up for questions, if that's okay with everybody. So first, I'm Shauna Patterson-Stevens, she, her, hers, Vice President for Inclusive Excellence and Belonging at Central Michigan University on the homelands of the Anishinaabe. I am currently the program chair, the conference chair for ASHE 2025. It's a big golden 50th year, so we're really excited about all the things that are about to happen this year. And I have been engaged in a variety of options, including the one that we'll be discussing today. I'm just going to go through our panelist listing in alphabetical order, so we'll avoid confusion and awkward pauses. First, we have Katherine.
So hi everyone, good afternoon in the time zone that I'm in. So I'm an assistant professor at Loyola University Chicago, which is on the homelands of the Council of Three Fires. And I am really excited to be here. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and both Dr. Mac and myself did one of these sessions last year. So I'm excited to be talking about that experience. And then I will point it to the next person in the alphabetical order. So Dr. Hall.
Hi everyone, Dr. Candace Hall. I am an assistant professor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I'm very excited to be here today and talk with you all about my experience. I am coming to you from the land of the Osage people and the Colquian people. Yes, thank you. Oh, I pass it over to Amanda. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Latz. Please call me Mandy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming from Muncie, Indiana, which is the original homelands, the Shawnee, Miami, and Potawatomi people. At Ball State, I'm professor of higher education and community college leadership. A lot of my work has to do with the photo voice methodology. So that is an area that I can add some contributions to throughout our conversation today. And I might be able to bring kind of a historical perspective to this presentation type. It was a section for a while. And it's amazing to kind of look back at this particular point to the inception of this PVDS concept coming into ASHE and how much it's changed and I think enriched our conference each and every year. So just really excited to be here and share space with folks. Now I have to do alphabetical work in my head. So I think, thank you. Jacqueline, I'm going to toss it to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jackie Mac. I use she, her pronouns. There's a few of us who are in the central time zone, so it's nice to kind of see what it looks like outside your windows. I'm an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University. There are 4 locations of our institution in DeKalb, Illinois, Naperville, Illinois, Rockford, Illinois, and Oregon. And the 4 locations occupy the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe people, as well as the Council of Three Fires, as well as Asak and Fox, Kickapoo, Peoria, Miami, and Sioux peoples. I am a co-presenter with Dr. Cho on my first PVDS session, and so I'm really excited, but also feel a little bit out of place to be a part of this group because I'm newer to thinking about some of my work in more creative ways, but have found it so much more fulfilling and freeing and liberating in so many ways. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. And I will hand things over to Dr. Okello to close out our introductions.
Thank you, Dr. Mac. And greetings, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, as we're on the East Coast moving into evening. My name is Wilson Okello. My pronouns are he, him. I am an assistant professor at Penn State. I'm a transdisciplinary artist and scholar whose work really sort of engages Black critical theories to advance work on Black being and becoming. I'm coming to you from Penn State, located on the unceded lands of the Erie, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, the Shawnee, the Susquehannock, and Wazazi nations. So far as my relationship to the PVDS world, I've been involved since its inception, submitting as a viewer and audience member, witness, if you will, also as a program chair. And so really excited to just talk through, as Mandy mentioned, the evolution of PVDS and its potentialities. And so excited to be in conversation with this wonderful group.
And so, Wilson, I think that's actually a great segue into the next part. And I would argue, Dr. Mac, that you've been doing this much longer than you like to give yourself credit for, but that's another conversation for another day. All of you have been doing amazing work around performance, visual, and digital scholarship. And so from your perspective, if you'd be willing to share with our viewers your perceptions of the history, the importance of this particular segment of ASHE's conference, and maybe your impressions on the proposal process. I'm going to start with Wilson since you started with history.
I was
How
gonna,
about that?
you know, I'll just get started. So I would begin by saying that I think folks have, to your point concerning Dr. Mac, folks have been doing PVDS for a lot longer than we've had a section for it, or for longer than ASHE. Really, many organizations have recognized it. I think it's existed in spaces like ICQI, the International Congress on Qualitative Inquiry, or Imagine America, and so many other places, right? Folks have been doing and been involved in the work, and have been doing it at places like ASHE, right? The formal conference sessions. Folks have integrated spoken word, and they've deployed various sort of sonic methodologies and visual methodologies. And so what the PVDS section I think has provided folks is with a concentrated space to say, one, that as an organization, we value the opportunities here and want to demonstrate that value as its own sort of section, right? So I think that being as a major move of the conference or the organization is significant. And I think it's opened folks up. It's served as an invitation for folks to do this sort of experimenting and begin to sort of imagine themselves as artists, as interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary scholars in ways that, I think perhaps felt different for them, as they thought about the formal ASHE sessions. And so thinking historically, thinking genealogically, I think folks have, again, been doing the work, but the session, right, the submission process has served as an invitation for folks to really begin to experiment and to engage those creative ideas that at times often are thwarted because of the formal conference processes.
Yeah. And does anybody else have any thoughts even about, like some of the benefits to then having a PVDS or, maybe some of the challenges that emerged as a result of us learning how to even submit proposals specific to this piece as it emerged within ASHE based upon the needs that you even just shared, Dr. Okello?
I can add a little bit. I think in the early days of us conceptualizing this as a section, it felt a little clunky because we often had a lot of proposals and ideas that connected well with another section. Like, oh gosh, like this is a PVDS like format, but it's about student contexts. So it kind of the way I remember the history being is for a long time, PVDS was kind of, okay, we're going to do this thing. We're going to invite folks in. But it was like a section over here, kind of not fully integrated into the conference in terms of topically. So I love what has happened more recently where PVDS is considered a kind of like a format that you can present your work in, but then you can tag it to any of the topical areas that you like. And I think that's really a beautiful space. And I mean, I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to like announce that this is a PVDS section or a format because it would be so normative. But the fact that ASHE said yes to early requests, and I want to just name like Carrie Cordegas, Bridget Turner Kelly, Katie Branch, Chris Linder, folks who were kind of pushing at the organization to really do something new and different with the way we think about scholarship, because it really takes the modality from the margin to the center, to kind of call on bell hooks a little bit. But I think one of the toughest things for folks, and I'm sure others will chime in here, is how do you conceptualize the way you craft the proposal when you're doing something, your presentation is going to be sort of performance, visual or digital. But I might offer just something that I've been thinking about and ruminating on is we might think about this sort of like an artifact exegesis type of situation where the performance, the digital presentation, this is the proposal gives you the opportunity to interpret and explain sort of the scholarly connections to what you've created or what you're going to showcase. But that is a point of tension. So just sort of how do you explain in a proposal how you're going to put forward a documentary film or an exhibition of some kind, or a series of art pieces that are connected to appropriated forms or something like that. So I don't know, just some other things to consider as we get into the conversation a little bit more deeply.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, to sort of chime in for this as well, I think I went to a lot of PVDS sessions before thinking about submitting them. And I think very much similar to what everyone has stated right now about, like, you think about the evolutions of what we study, where we study, who we study, who we study with on, right? Like you think about all the ways that like research has expanded and become multimodal. I think it's actually a very natural and needed evolution then to think about, well, then how do we present, right? We know we've learned pedagogically that teaching at students is not good. And so we think about expanding that in the same way. I think conference presentations have really sort of been called in to be like, what are we doing with 15-minute presentations being talked at, which in some ways, you know, to be clear, like I've seen great presentations where people make them really interactive and they're beautiful, but I think this affords much greater flexibility in ways that some of my favorite sessions, have been PVDS ones. I think about the Fat on Campus exhibition, essentially, that was this like beautiful gallery walkthrough. And I think about other sessions, not necessarily at ASHE, but other places or workshops. I know Dr. Mac and myself, we went to one in Chicago that really sort of opened our eyes to like, oh wow, like this is what it could look like. And I think because of that, and I remember Dr. Hall's with the debut with the movie or documentary, right? Like I remember sort of key pivotal moments where people were excited because it was not only new, but such a beautiful way to re-engage with scholarship and reinvigorate us into sort of what can scholarship look like as reflective of the evolutions in our daily praxis of how we engage with the campus and higher education at large. I think because of that, though, and this is, I think, Dr. Mack, if you want to chime in too, I think one of the struggles that we had was like the world felt like we could do anything. And so it was like, well, then what should be the goal? You know, at points I remember we were sort of talking like, do we make this sort of feel like a class? Do we need to like make like objectives? What do we want this to be? Because suddenly we have too many freedoms, which is, you know, a rare sort of stance to be in. And so I think that was one of the areas where like we had lots of conversations when we put ours together last year, like what is the purpose and goal and what do we want people to take away? Because we were like everything. And then all of a sudden we had like, you know, 15,000 goals and essentially a half day session that it could have easily turned into.
So in thinking even about that in the stream of thought on how to prepare for a proposal, we do have varying formats. And so in addition to thinking about like the actual goals of the presentation, how are you also thinking through like the type of presentation that you offer? If you're going to be a part of a quote unquote symposia, if you're going to take a full-fledged approach to developing a proposal that takes up the full scope of time, and then building in the infrastructure within that space, using all the freedom that's available to you. How are you going through thinking about the process as you're also then considering what it means to then submit a proposal to ASHE?
I'll speak from my experience. So the first time I submitted a PVDS session, I don't remember submitting it for the full 75 minutes, but that's what I got when I got accepted. And so I was really excited, and also like, you know, the documentary runtime is only 23 minutes. What am I gonna do with all, or no, initially I wasn't even going to show the documentary. I was just going to show clips of that and clips of the podcast that I was on to talk about the creative process. And I credit my friend and colleague JT Snipes with pushing me like, no, you should show the film. And I was like, what if it's not scholarly enough? And so he pushed me to think about what I could do with that 75 minutes to engage people in a different way. And I was fully prepared for people to come at it with, you know, what kind of methodology did you use, and ask me all these questions about rigor. But what I was met with was like emotion, like the work made people feel, and I wasn't prepared for that. The 75 minutes also gave me an opportunity to play with the space in a different way. So I don't know if people may remember, but I had like a red carpet and a backdrop, and it felt like you were going to this premiere event. People were able to network before we did the screening and after. And so it was a space to share our scholarly work, but also a place of community where people could gather together. The second PVDS session I submitted in 23, I fully expected that to just be an art gallery. But me and my collaborator got our wires crossed. And we weren't able to shoot any of the content that we hoped to present at ASHE that year. And so in the pivot, he said, hey, let's set up a studio at ASHE instead. Let's reach out and see if we can kind of change what we are doing. And so we were in a set, we had a 12 to 15-minute presentation with a couple of other people talking about their work. And then we had a studio space where Imagine Futures began. We didn't even know what it was or what it could be. And so the beauty of the story is, of that story for me, is just learning to pivot, being open to different possibilities that you didn't even think about at first, and also being communicative when things change related to your submission.
I can build off of what Dr. Hall mentioned, and I think to give some context, also Dr. Cho's comments, our proposal was titled "Are We Well?" An interactive exhibit on academia's unwellness. And so it was in preparation for the proposal and in actually designing envisioning what the session was going to look like and planning for it. We had a lot of like meta conversations of, okay, are we packing too much in again? Are we trying to do too much? If what we're socialized to do in academia is to maximize and optimize and what would we want to do with this session that is interactive, that's a space that's counter to how maybe a lot of other sessions typically feel like. And so we were really trying to do what I think academics are typically socialized not to do, is to be in our bodies and think about how are we going to feel in this session? How do we want to feel? And what are some invitations we want to propose to the folks who show up to our session? It is a session that so it's an interactive symposium, and I think we envisioned it as such. And then as we were preparing for it, there was I felt like maybe Katherine and I having a collaborator was really helpful. I think it was going to be really hard, I think, for me to have done this like on my own, but some of it because of the way that the project emerged and that we were having these conversations, we were attending these events together, it made sense. It felt like a natural continuation of the conversations we were having, which then turned into this, like, it was just a really intense, like, I think Dr. Cho had said this, like, retroactively, like this is basically like a dual ethnography what we're doing, because we were doing this over like 3 or 4 weeks, and we're like, this needs to be something, like how do we make it something? So I think we really followed intuitively what felt like a very different experience that we were having about a particular text, really trying to force academics to think about how committed we are to our own unwellness and upholding our own unwellness. And so that actually that question helped us think about, okay, so if we want it to be interactive, we want this to be an invitation, how might this be an experience about not just academia in general, but our experience at ASHE? And so one of the things that I feel really, I still feel really good about was we included an activity where we had people hack their ASHE schedules to look at their ASHE schedule and think about what they're feeling in the moment when they see their schedule, and to give themselves permission in the moment to just take stuff off, block stuff out. And I mean, the fact that we had at least one person say, like, I feel like a lot more excited about my ASHE now because I made some decisions right now. I was like, great, this is everything we hope that this session would be. And so, you know, there's a lot that I'm not sharing, but I think that following that intuition and this, the fact that this section exists and this type of scholarship can really be included and centered in a different way, I think for me personally and professionally has given me, it's opened up, this is gonna sound so cliche, I'm sorry, like a door, like a new doorway into like, not just how important the work is, but also in how we're sharing the work. Like the alignment, right, feels so much more, it just feels good. It feels excited. I didn't feel drained. I didn't feel tired. It was wonderful. And I'm so glad to see that there's someone here who was at that session and can give us some of that feedback too.
Now, to your point, I wonder if all of our sessions felt that way, would we feel the need to have to hack our schedules and take things off, right? Like if we know that it's going to feel good and be communal spaces where we can learn in different ways, how that might excite us in a different way or excite us in general.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think I would just, one thing I'm thinking about is the PVDS format as an invitation to ask a different set of questions, right? We can ask questions of the body. We can ask questions of how we feel, of affect, if you will. We can ask the questions that don't fit within the register of academe and don't need to be answered, right? So even as, you know, I think it was Dr. Cho mentioned, you know, this sort of question of like, what do we do with the thing that, or this needs to be something. Like oftentimes, you know, academics love to turn something into a paper, right? Like we just, everything needs to be a paper. We had a good conversation. Let's write about it. I don't mean to make light of this, but we do, right? I mean, and stop me if I'm lying. But I wonder if PVDS serves as an opportunity for us to say, stop, you don't need to do that thing with it, but you can do this with it. It can live elsewhere, right? We can live in the embodied experience, Dr. Travers, of communion, right? We can live in what we can experience wellness by annotating our own wellness for Dr. Cho and Dr. Mac, right? Like there are different ways that we can actually tap into questions that we have without turning it into the important, but I don't know if it's always sort of productive paper session, right? And so again, I really do see it as a space of experimentation, as an opportunity to ask these different sorts of questions. How do we feel, and begin to sort of pursue that question of feelings.
I was also going to say for the in asking these different questions, it also necessitates engaging in the space differently. And so I think the proposal that Dr. Mack and I submitted, we had to, you know, because I think for a lot of us, when you know, both for papers, but for any type of proposal, it makes so much more sense in our head, and we can envision exactly what we think it's going to look like, but we have to translate that to invite the readers who are then reading these proposals, right, to understand how we're also envisioning this space, right? So, you know, and I think again, to exactly what Dr. Mack said, like it was so much easier to have a thought partner on this, where then like if we're like, oh, there's going to be like markers, it's like, okay, but what are the markers for? Because we just said we'll have markers, right? And so I think for things like that, it was I think that was something that was really important, particularly in the proposal, that I think it's hard, right? Because since all of these different proposals can and will look so different, engage with the space so differently, it is an invitation to attendees and also invitations to the proposal readers to envision it. And so I think that was at least an area that I struggled with, because in my head, I'm like, how do I just put the image in my head and then just put it on paper and be like, can I just sketch it out for you of like what I think this should look like? But then we had to write it in like a proposal format. Yeah.
And Dr. Joe, I wonder if this might be an opportunity for us to even think of, and this might exist, so stop me, but ways to sort of talk out and or map out our proposals differently, right? Maybe that's a conversation with Alicia and the team. But to your point, I do think the reviewers who are recruited to PVDS have a sensibility for the what else, right? Which is to say that even if this doesn't, or I should say, they're attuned to space and questions and theory, and they're trying to sort of think with authors in these sort of expansive ways. And so even if it doesn't make sense for you, right, or it doesn't all sort of come to the fore, I do think there's a sensibility that is talked about and attempted at with the PVDS reviewers that is at the very least mindful that folks are thinking expansively about how to pull a project into words.
Some things to emphasize that I heard y'all saying too, removing the idea of what has traditionally been understood as rigor, removing traditional conceptualizations of what research can constitute, even thinking about the idea of how we turn everything into a paper, because that's our currency in the academy. What if we could also move in the direction of thinking about community building in capitalistic context, like as another form of creating social capital, without attaching it to productivity, but maybe attaching it to wellness, holistic development, making sure that we're creating a well space in higher education, right? So I think that's really the important part about PVDS. And hopefully people are even thinking about what it means to submit proposals that might run similarly akin to PVDS proposals in other parts of ASHE. Because we really want to think about broader ways of engaging work writ large in an out-of-the-box way that really critiques, questions, and reimagines what research, scholarship, and creation can be. So we want people to be as creative and thoughtful as possible. I do know that one part, Dr. Okello ended his comments on this part of the process, like the review process. I know that we're still thinking about ways to ensure that folks' identities aren't emerging in their proposals. And the point of that is just to make sure that we're trying to be as equitable as possible, that folks with name recognition don't receive favor. And so can you talk a bit more about how you went about creating proposals that didn't necessarily reveal your identities, but but worked towards ensuring that reviewers understood the purpose of the work that you were doing?
Taking a peek at one of my proposals to remember.
I think we can start. I think at the time, if a reviewer was somehow friends with one of us and heard one of us talk, we were the proposal that we submitted also emerged from primarily Dr. Cho and I's mutual engagement in a particular text, which is Mimi Cook's book, Dear Elia. And it was published in February 2024. And I think thank you, Dr. Cho. Dr. Cho is showing us a cover of that beautiful text. And I think our proposal wasn't, unless you knew one of us and you heard us talking about it and us recommending it to you as someone to read it, it was actually, I think, relatively okay for us it wasn't something we struggled with in our proposal in terms of masking our identities. And I also say this as someone who I'm not someone who does a lot of PVDS stuff in the academy formally as stuff that I'm submitting. And so I think I don't necessarily have to wrestle with or weigh some of the factors that I think other folks on today's panel probably do.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to my first PVDS proposal. And as you were talking, I was reminded, yeah, this wasn't something that was my thing starting off. So maybe a couple people here and there knew I was working on a documentary, but mostly people didn't. And so it was easier the first go around. The second go around was something that was completely different from the first. So, I don't know that people would have guessed that it was me, because I didn't really talk about the former project and just, refer to myself and my collaborator as the team. So that's how we went about masking our identities.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I think a lot of times when like we write positionality sections in papers or in proposals, we use identity, and like for some of us at the intersections of the different identities or positions that we have, you can sort of, by process of elimination, there's only X amount of people holding XYZ spaces or places or identities or backgrounds. And I was looking through our proposal as well, where I think for us, our positionality had less of, I think, like those types of potentially identifying markers and more so like our positionality in relationship to why we wanted to bring this work to ASHE. And so we talked more about for like our positionality, you know, like the possessionality, motivation, connection to the research sort of paragraph that I think a lot of us include of like why this work is important to us. We talked more about like our relationship to unwellness and academia's relationship to unwellness in general, and sort of things that we had been reflecting on is why we wanted to bring it over. And I think I do know that at the end, you know, I had a friend who was sort of like, oh, I wound up reviewing this, and I actually knew that it was both of you from the get-go because you two have talked about this book sort of nonstop. But there's also three other people who talked about the book nonstop too, so I figured it was one of you five, right? And then laughed, you know, sort of realizing that because the sometimes these spaces are very small and very niche, right? And so I think like masking is sort of, you know, you try to mask as best as you can, also knowing that people are highly, highly specialized. And sometimes like, you know, if there's only a few people who use a certain type of methodology or a certain type of like, you know, or only a couple people, if a handful full of people use photo voice, then, you know, you might not be able to lock into that individual, but you'll have a sense of it's probably one of the 10, that, and I think that's part of the struggle and challenge of masking too.
Well, and as people are completing their proposals, if they still need additional guidance or support, they can always reach out to the program chairs. They can reach out to Alicia. They can reach out to myself, just to make sure that they are following the process to the best of their ability. We could always offer additional support if it's needed, but we feel like, you know, broadly, if you just work to the best of your ability to remove those identifying markers, it should be okay. As we wrap up, because we want to make sure that folks have the ability to ask questions if they'd like, any final thoughts or advice on ways to be as creative as possible in the proposal process for PVDS, but maybe even other options that are available in the ASHE conference?
I would encourage people to lean into who they are. Um, I feel like for a long time I was trying to operate in as who I thought I was supposed to be or who people wanted me to be, and not necessarily who I am as a person. And when I started to lean into my creative side, and marry that with my scholarly identity, then beautiful things began to happen. But you know, initially I was scared because it was, you know, this is a risk. I'm not supposed to be making films and doing all this artsy stuff, right? I'm supposed to be publishing papers, but to take the risk and to step out and say, no, I'm going to explore my scholarship in creative ways, such that it reaches a wider audience, is something that I would encourage other people to really think carefully about how they can do the same and what their art form is, and be okay with your art form looking different from others, right? Be okay even if people don't understand it initially. I hope we are able to have more conversations throughout the association about how our work can look differently and how we can work collaboratively to create, like, truly reimagine what we are doing in education.
Well, if no one else has anything else to add, let's go ahead and start reviewing the questions. I see one asking about 75-minute sessions. Are collaborations prioritized, or are those open to people who are doing solo presentations as well?
So I can speak to the logistical piece, and then folks who have experience being part of a larger session versus having the full session can speak to that. So what the program committee is going to do is they're going to build sessions for the conference. And so PVDS is a format that could be included in a variety of areas of the conference. So I put the link for our program committee in the chat. And so we have different sections. And so each section will be reviewing the proposals for their particular section that as they come through. So when you're preparing your submission, you're going to need to select which section you want it to be reviewed under. So you'll go through and you'll say, well, my proposal really should be in the grad, professional student, postdoctoral scholars section of the conference, or the policy, finance, and econ section, right? So you could have a PVDS session in any number of those sections of the conference. If you submit as an individual presentation of the 12 to 15 minutes, your proposal, if it's accepted, will be paired with 2 or so other individual presentations. So we might have a photo voice presentation, a PVDS photo voice presentation paired with a paper on grad persistence in study abroad programs, paired with another scholarly paper on a graduate postdoc topic, right? So the program committee will work to put presentations together that are around a similar topic as much as they can. If you propose a full session, which you can do, you would have that full 75-minute session in your proposal. You're going to show how you're going to fill that time. And yours, if it's accepted, would just fill an entire session block for that time, rather than being paired with other presentations. If that makes sense.
And my understanding is the priority goes more towards strength of the proposal and less towards, number of folks listed in the proposal or number of minutes dedicated to the proposal. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Alicia, but again, I really want to thank our panelists today for sharing your expertise, your advice. We have one more question, but I still want to thank you for sharing your expertise and advice, sharing your time, and being really thoughtful and creative around your approach to scholarship, because you're setting a new foundation for what it means to develop knowledge. And so we're starting to bust the gates open and think newly about what scholarship means. And it's really important that you're thinking about it in these ways. Another question we do have, it does look like PVDS is only virtual for CEP. At this time, my understanding is CEP is virtual because there are other programmatic priorities on the ground, on site this year. And so they wanted to make space for those conversations.
Yes, I put the link in the chat. It's a really exciting year for CEP reimagining their pre-conference. So the pre-conference for CEP will include the peer-reviewed content, which would include these submissions virtually on October 29th. That's the first part, the virtual pre-conference colloquium via Zoom. And then when you come to the conference in Denver on Wednesday, November 12th, they're going to have a whole day of programming that centers wellness, community building, holistic approach to their interpretation of the theme, and what they really wanted to reimagine how they spend their time, how they feel at the conference, what they want that experience to be. So the CEP Council leaders and co-chairs of the pre-conference are really excited about what they're pulling together. But there's more information on that website, and you can also reach out to the co-chairs or myself if you want to be connected with folks and have specific questions.
You also to those that came to the session today to listen in, and to those that are listening to the recording. We appreciate your interest in the PVDS forum, and we look forward to the proposals. I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Alicia.
Yes. I did want to make sure folks know about additional opportunities to get support as you're navigating the call for proposals, thinking about potentially submitting and also considering volunteering for the conference. So let me just share quickly, if Zoom will allow. If y'all can see upcoming events here on the screen. Yes, okay. So this is from the ASHE website, just our events. If you clicked on the events from our website, ashe.ws, it'll take you to this page. And on the category here, if you navigate down to annual conference, call for proposals and volunteer support series, this will give you a quick glance about additional support available for you around the conference call for proposals. So if you have specific questions about your specific offerings or your submission that you're working on, we have drop-in hours with program committee. The next one I think is Monday. You can drop in. There's obviously no need to pre-register. You can just join the session. We also have a CEP, MPP, writing and community workshop. So that might be another place to join and be in community with folks. They're going to have some group writing time around the call during this session. And then CIHE, our Council on International Higher Education, is also offering a webinar talking about submitting and considering proposals around international higher ed topics. And then we have an additional drop-in hours with the program committee. In addition to these, as Shauna mentioned, you're also welcome to reach out to any one of us for support, and we will get you connected to folks who can help if we're not able to directly. But we're so excited to be shining light on this format and really helping folks understand that it is an option. I think sometimes folks are intimidated in like ways that y'all are naming in terms of this doesn't fit my traditional idea of the proposal format. So if there's nitty-gritty questions about that, how your proposal will be evaluated, that can be found in the call for proposals, but happy to meet with folks to talk through that process to make sure that you have all your questions answered prior to that April 30th due date. I think I will go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can hang out if there's additional questions that folks want to ask offline. But thank you again so much to our wonderful volunteer leaders who answered the call to share their wisdom. We really appreciate y'all. And to Dr. Patterson-Stevens for leading the conference committee this year. We're really excited to welcome y'all to Denver and to the virtual conference day. So look forward to seeing y'all soon.